In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Beijing called President Trump's decision to slap tariffs on another $200 billion worth of goods, quote, totally unacceptable, but stopped short of spelling out what it will do in return. We will discuss the tech fallout for the ongoing trade standoff. Plus, Lightspeed venture partners backed newly public companies like Snap, Stitch Fix, and Nutanix. Now it is launching a new fund with $1.8 billion to put to work. We'll speak to Lightspeed's Jeremy Liu. And our exclusive conversation with Pandora CEO Roger Lynch. We'll talk about its recent partnership with Snap and how the streaming service is fighting off the likes of Spotify and Apple. But first to our top story. Another day, another new escalation in the ongoing U.S.-China trade dispute. This time, the White House is threatening to impose new 10% tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese-made products. The list this time includes tech goods like televisions and electric car batteries. One big-ticket item missing this round, smartphones made by U.S. companies like Apple, but are assembled at plants in China. So while your future iPhone may be spared, for now, consumer tech might soon see some price hikes. Here to tell us more about how this could impact tech coming from China, we have Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman, who covers both Apple and consumer technology. So the list has gone from like a dozen to thousands of products. Right. Which products are we talking about here?
Well, from a consumer tech perspective, the first thing we have to note is right now it doesn't appear that Apple products like the iPhone and the iPad and the Apple Watch are affected.
Why?
There's a lot of different reasons why, but one of the biggest points of emphasis is that Apple is a California company. They are based in the United States. Donald Trump and Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, they have talked about this many times. Cook has said that he doesn't think that these tariffs are the solution to either the problem that the U.S. administration is saying is out there. And there's other facets to it. The products are designed in the U.S., even though they're manufactured in China, and then Apple sells them all over the world. So it's unclear what kind of hit they would get on these tariffs. But there's a lot at stake here.
What about the components that go into iPhones and iPads?
Right, and so if you look at the components that are on the list of tariffs, it's not a big amount of components that are in the iPhone. The iPhones now are increasingly made of stainless steel, different types of metals. What we're seeing is some steels and some aluminums on the tariffs. It's unclear what percentage of the phones are actually impacted, and if there's actually going to need to be a price hike on the iPhone because of the margins Apple already gets. Could they switch to other components if necessary? Would they do this just for phones sold in the US and China? Different things here, but if you look at Tesla stock is down today because cobalt battery technology is actually on today's list of $200 billion of new stuff, and that is the core of the batteries that power electric vehicles.
I do have a chart in my GTV library that TVs from China may be getting a lot more expensive. What's going to happen?
Yeah, that's really interesting. The problem is why I don't think it's a big deal is because there's very few very high-end China-based TV manufacturers that sell their TVs in the United States. Many of the TVs sold in the United States are made by Sony and Samsung. Those are companies that are not necessarily affected by the tariffs.
So what is the actual impact then going to be on consumers here? What should we be worrying about?
What should we be worrying about? Well, cobalt batteries, as we see more electric cars happening. But I think outside of the U.S., really we have to focus on the retaliatory tariffs. What is China going to do about this? And that's where Apple really can be affected. About 20% of Apple sales across 2017 were in China. If China slaps growing tariffs on the U.S. for selling iPhones in China, then that could be a problem for Apple in the region. There has to be a decision to be made. Apple can't get away with not being a company affected by U.S. tariffs and not being affected by China's tariffs. They're going to be affected from one side or the other. It's to be seen which side they're affected by, if either.
So, we saw Tesla now working towards opening a plant in China. This has been going on for a while, but it certainly goes against Trump's direction here. But what are some other solutions for these companies?
Yeah, more solutions are to have a homegrown manufacturing of different components, building cobalt in the United States. If you look at Apple, building devices in the United States, bringing up metals and other technologies in the United States. But that also has effect on consumers too, because as we know, products built and developed in the United States, anything with a made in the USA slapped on it, are traditionally more expensive because the labor costs of building products in the U.S. are still far higher than they are in China.
All right, Mark Gurman, Bloomberg Tech, as always, thanks for keeping us posted. Meantime, President Trump has embarked on a European tour with a sequence of high-profile events, starting with a NATO summit in Brussels. Let's get to Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde in London with more. And Caroline, it was quite a dramatic and remarkable day. Walk us through the day's events.
I mean, just extraordinary. And in some ways, tech was involved because a lot of these arguments seem to come out via Twitter, of course, Trump's favorite mode of communication. And he took to Twitter ahead of the NATO as he was arriving in Brussels, really heading out at the defense spending of the EU, saying it wasn't high enough. He was complaining about the trade deficits that he has with the EU, the so-called tariffs and barriers to entry he complained about. He had such a Twitter tirade that it sparked the other key Donald that we have here in Europe, the EU president. He's president of the European Council, saying that's Donald Tusk. He hit back saying the US doesn't have and won't have a better ally than the EU. He then had the Secretary of State for the US, Mike Pompeo, saying what a wonderful institution NATO was, all on Twitter. I mean, it's extraordinary. He then even had the old Secretary of State, of course, John Kelly, saying he has never seen anything so strange or counterproductive than what has been going on in terms of the President Trump's reaction at NATO, notably really hitting out aggressively at Angela Merkel's Germany, saying that Germany is too reliant on Russian energy, on Russian gas. So, I mean, just unprecedented NATO meeting.
So, was there any agreement between these seemingly fraying allies?
You have to ask the question, and even while we see Donald Trump calling for greater spending, he wants the other allies, the other nations to double their commitment to defense spending. That's his real gripe. But there does seem to be something that they are working towards, and it's actually involving tech. It's cybersecurity. We did get a key announcement press conference coming from the Jens Stoltenberg, he's the NATO General Secretary, saying, yes, we have agreed to up our investment in so-called, what they call hybrid warfare, so ensuring that they're protected against cyber attacks that are then interweaved with armies on the ground. They've got a new cyber operations centre to be announced. It's going to be drawing on members' cyber capabilities. So there was some agreement there, but notably an awful lot of tension.
Next, Trump heads to the UK. What are we expecting?
This will be fascinating. He comes to the United Kingdom on Thursday, Emily, and he's going to be jetting in. He's going to be going to Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire to begin with. That's going to be a dinner, a black tie dinner no less, with Theresa May, the Prime Minister of the UK. He's then going to be jetting into London, where he's staying with the US ambassador in Regent's Park. But I might add there is going to be protests throughout his three-day working visit, because not only have protests outside Blenheim Palace, there's going to be protests in London. He's then going to be, I understand, doing a military site visit. He's going to be visiting the Queen, having tea with the Queen at Windsor Castle, but expect protests there too. And get this, the most fascinating thing of all, there is going to be a giant Trump baby balloon that's going to be flying above Westminster. This is something that's been agreed to, that they got the thumbs up by Sadiq Khan, the mayor here. He's allowing it to occur, but just an amazing set of protests. What's sad is that the US ambassador has actually had to warn those Americans living in the UK that perhaps they should be keeping a low profile during the president's visit. So there is going to be tension here on the ground. But then from tea with the Queen, he's going to be jetting over to Scotland to visit his key golf resorts, Emily.
All right, Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde for us in London. We will be following, and we're going to be covering more cybersecurity issues with Gil Shwed, the CEO of Checkpoint, later in the show, talking about election security and safeguarding it around the world. Well, UK regulators may fine Facebook $664,000 over the Cambridge Analytica scandal. The social network failed to prevent user data from falling into the hands of the political consulting firm that worked on the Trump campaign. Regulators say that data, belonging to as many as 87 million Facebook users and their friends, may have been, as we've discussed ad nauseum, misused. Coming up, we will speak to Lightspeed Venture Partners Jeremy Liu about how the firm will put to work its massive new fund. That is next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. Listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. In the last decade, Lightspeed Venture Partners has backed consumer darlings like Snap and Stitch Fix, along with enterprise success stories like Nutanix, MuleSoft, and AppDynamics, and another company, 47, that just went public last week. Now, it is starting a new chapter with some new money to put to work, securing $1.8 billion in capital in its new fund. Joining us to discuss, Jeremy Liu, partner at Lightspeed, who actually discovered Snap and became its very first institutional investor, which we have talked about. All this new money. How do you find the next Snap?
You know, we got to get back to work.
Where do you think you're going to find it?
I think, you know, that's one of the most interesting things is as consumer technology, where I spend most of my time, has really become popular culture, we've seen a lot more of these companies that can become multi-billion-dollar companies being started outside the Bay Area. And so you have Snap, for example, based in LA. You have Giphy, another of our portfolio companies, based in New York. And those are the two places that have really historically been the places where popular culture has been created in the US. I think we're going to be seeing more and more companies created in those two places.
So you're traveling a lot?
On a plane a lot. You got to go to where people are.
So what is overhyped? Where won't you be putting this money?
I think, let's see.
Crypto?
Well, we're continuing to invest quite heavily in crypto. We've been dedicating quite a lot of capital to that. I think it's hard to say that something is overhyped until you really see enough time pass. So there are some examples of places where I think the hype got a little ahead of the reality. One is around voice-based interfaces. We haven't seen companies being built on the back of Alexa or Google Home yet, but I would emphasize the yet on that, because I do think those are things that are going to become very real opportunities as they get into more and more homes. So
you were last on the show when we talked about Snap and spectacles. It was a really fun shoot. We both walked around San Francisco wearing spectacles, which didn't pan out and were overhyped. You know, Snapchat is struggling as Instagram seems to be unstoppable. Do you still think it has the potential to get to 1 billion users?
I would say never bet against the team at Snap. The level of product insight that they have has always been extraordinary, and they've been talking about being a camera-first company for a really long time. And now, as more and more companies start to come around to that perspective, I think the advantage of their head start and their thinking will really be to their advantage. So
we're continuing to see new funds raised. We just had Index Ventures on the show yesterday, General Catalyst. These are massive numbers, you know, billions of dollars that VC funds are raising, but can you really put it all to work at this point, or is the market too frothy?
Companies are staying private for longer and longer, and that's something that I'm sure that you've talked about at length on this show. And as they stay private for longer, they require more access to capital in private markets. And what we want to do is to make sure that we are able to back our companies all the way through to their IPOs. Whereas historically that has been, on average, perhaps 7 years. Now it's looking more like 9 to 11 years. And as that additional capital is raised, making sure that the insiders can continue to support the company through that growth has been really important. That's been what's driving the growth in these funds.
So, tech IPOs, we've seen some successful ones so far this year. We just saw Xiaomi stumble in Hong Kong. What's your outlook for the rest of the year? Are we going to see a slowdown?
I think that we are going to see more of these companies go out in the next 12 to 18 months. Some of the companies have already pre-announced their intentions to go public. We personally have seen a lot of liquidity over the course of the last 18 months. Whether that has been the Snap IPO, the Stitch Fix IPO, Nutanix, AppD getting acquired, MuleSoft going public and getting acquired, Zscaler went public. I think we've had 7 or 8 multi-billion-dollar IPOs, and so we expect this trend to continue.
So, aside from New York and LA, what areas, what markets do you think you're going to find the next big success story?
So, focusing on consumer, where I spend most of my time, I think that there are a couple of really interesting trends. One is we're seeing increased migration of video consumption from television to new mobile devices and the new tvOS players. We're spending time thinking about what the analog of every genre or channel in the old television world will be in this new world. And so a great example is reality TV. reality TV in the old world, I would argue Snap stories and Instagram stories are that analog in this new world. ESPN, I would argue that Twitch is the analog in this new world. CNBC, we would argue that Cheddar is the analog in this new world. And so starting to think about all of these different genres, the Food Network, Tasty and Taste Made. So we're working with one company trying to think about what televangelism would look like in a mobile-first video world. And so there's a lot of really exciting opportunities in that area.
So, I'm very concerned and curious about diversity in VC. Lightspeed does back a number of female entrepreneurs. What are you doing to continue to try to build a more diverse team within the firm and hire more female partners?
So we have two female investors that have both joined the firm in the last 2 to 3 years and continue to be focused on having a diverse slate of candidates for future hires that we're planning on making. But if you look again at the consumer world where I spend most of my time, about 33% of the companies that we've founded over the last 5 years have had a female founder, which is significantly higher. I think it's about 4 or 5 times higher than the industry average. And we definitely view that that consumer technology is popular culture. Popular culture has historically been driven by the interests of young women. And so it's not surprising that young female entrepreneurs are most likely to understand the interests of young female consumers. And so that's why I think we've really over-indexed on that front.
What do you think of All Raise and women in VC sort of banding together to fund more women and get more women hired?
I think that there are a lot of fantastic organizations that are all driving towards a common goal and one that we share. I think All Raise is a terrific example of that. I think that Project Include has also been doing fantastic work on that front. We are currently hosting a cohort of Girls Who Code at the Lightspeed offices for the summer, as well as a cohort from Project 2040, which is driving the inclusion of people from underrepresented ethnic minorities in the tech world. And so I think there's a lot of things that all of these organizations are doing to help with what I think is a very worthwhile goal.
All right, Jeremy Liu, Lightspeed Venture Partners. Always great to have you here on the show.
You too.
Thank you, and good to hear about the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Coming up, will a watch save your life? Can it? We look at the brave new world of health wearable technology. This is Bloomberg. Fitbit, Apple Watch, and now even bra companies claim to have the potential to detect cancer. Wearable health tech is moving into the future, albeit slowly. Enter iBeat, a smartwatch that continually monitors your heart rate and can send for emergency help. Still waiting for FDA approval and entering a crowded field. Just last September, Apple announced its new Apple Watch Series 3 with better cell connectivity. Device manufacturers have already begun tapping into it to develop medical devices. Here to discuss, iBeat CEO Ryan Howard and Kristen V. Brown, who covers healthcare for Bloomberg News. So, Ryan, crowded space, as I mentioned. What sets iBeat apart? Why is it worth the price?
So I think that when you're looking at buying a watch, effectively an Apple Watch is a device that tracks steps and its convenience play, so it flags your Uber a little bit faster. This effectively has the ability to potentially save your life. So it monitors your heart 24/7, and if it sees something that's out of a safe threshold, it's going to engage you, ask if you're okay, engage our dispatch. And then in addition, we have about 1.2 million people using a proprietary app that are trained in CPR that will come to aid you as well. So it's a full safety network.
So you say it's a watch that can save your life. You don't have FDA approval yet. Why launch without FDA approval? What do you plan to do to get there?
So we actually are going through FDA approval right now. The focus right now has been over the last 12 months since we started the company, we've had about 53,000 people come to the site and sign up for our waiting list. So we've seen a few of the products like the Owlet Smart Sock for babies come to market without FDA approval. So we feel we can serve the users now, help them while going through FDA in tandem to make a broader claim.
Kristen, how does this fit into the broader space?
Yeah, there's been so much interest in tapping into devices that we wear to monitor the heart. And I think what's really interesting is so far we've seen devices that monitor you continuously to detect conditions like atrial fibrillation, right? A lot of things that tap into the Apple Watch that do that. And we've talked about, devices that could potentially alert when something goes wrong. And I think the future is really all of those things in one device, potentially, that can monitor people continuously and alert when something goes wrong. And we're starting to see all those things kind of come about separately in the space, and it'll be interesting to see when they all come together.
So, some companies, though, have struggled, like Fitbit, for example. Sure. Why won't you go the way of that?
So, candidly, we don't think we're competing against a Fitbit or an Apple Watch. The market we're really competing against is Life Alert. So it's the PERS market. It's about a $6 billion market today. We are targeting an audience that's 50 plus. About 2/3 of people over 52 have heart disease. About 2% of them have an Apple Watch. About 4% have a Fitbit. So from our perspective, it's wide open. We're competing against a product that looks like a pendant. It looks like a dog collar. It brands you as sick as elderly. It's not mobile. It has no detection strategy. So if you have a cardiac arrest, you'll be basically found dead wearing it. And those devices are $50 to $100. So that's the market we're looking to disrupt, and we don't see Apple or Fitbit in that market today.
Lots of concerns about data and privacy now. Yep. How do you plan to safeguard that data, or would you sell it or monetize it?
Sure. So I used to run a company called Practice Fusion. We had an incredibly large data set, one of the largest in the country. And so this model is not to monetize patient information in any capacity. We think that's kind of a low integrity business. So we do think there's opportunity. Two of the largest life insurers in the United States have signed with the company to drive longevity amongst their policyholders. We think there's the ability to use this data because it's unique, longitudinal, and the fidelity is higher than anything else available to help them basically build more accurate actuary models to take on risk for people they normally would not, if that makes sense.
Christian, where is this tech going? I mean, there's, as you said, lots of people trying to capitalize on it, and it sounds great.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you mentioned, that you're competing against a product that makes you look sick. The Apple Watch, I think the hope was that it's a watch people already have. It doesn't brand you as sick. Your product is certainly sleek looking. But I think the struggle will be to make sure that people use them. It's hard to know what will happen until these devices are out in the real world. But I think there's really interesting potential, first of all, for doctors and researchers to get real-time data, right, to better understand these diseases in the real world versus when you come into the doctor's office when you're already sick. I also think, though, that there's a question of what happens if you have overdiagnosis, which is a problem. And yeah, how do you make sure that people keep wearing them?
And quickly, Ryan, cardiac arrest is one really important thing. What other things could a device like this?
Sure. So what's interesting, just to comment on that really quickly, we're also seeing the life insurers incentivized to pay for the device to wear it, and Medicare just released codes so the doctors actually get reimbursed to monitor people as well. The codes, the sensor on here, we're tracking tissue oxygenation, we're tracking blood pooling. We believe we can see from a diagnostic perspective in the future diabetes as well as hypertension on the wrist as well.
All right. Ryan Howard, CEO of iBeat. We'll keep our eyes on you guys.
Thank you so
Kristen
much.
Brown, who covers healthcare technology for Bloomberg Tech. Kristen V. Brown, thanks for joining me. All right, coming up, you can now share music through Snapchat thanks to Snap's newest partnership with Pandora. Pandora's new CEO, Roger Lynch, joins us for an exclusive interview next. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Just last month, Snap made its first big foray into working with outside developers by launching SnapKit. One company teaming up with Snap, Pandora, the largest music streaming service in the United States. Pandora listeners will be able to send songs to friends through song cards, expanding Pandora's social sharing capabilities. Recipients of the shared music can then swipe up and listen to the song through Pandora's Premium Access feature. Now, Pandora and Snap aren't the first to do this. Earlier this year, it was announced that Instagram would partner with Spotify to share music on its Story platform. For more, we're joined by Roger Lynch, CEO of Pandora, and you joined Pandora in September, but this is the first time you're joining us, so thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
How much business is the Snap partnership driving, or going to drive?
Well, it will roll out later today on iOS, and so it's too early to tell, but music is fundamentally a social experience, and the ability to share it on Snap now, the first time for Snap to be doing something with a music partner, I think is pretty meaningful.
So Instagram has a close relationship with Spotify. As I mentioned, Spotify has a close relationship with Facebook. Is that why you picked Snap or chose to partner with Snap?
Well, we chose Snap because they have a younger listener base who's very, younger listeners tend to be more engaged with music. And it was the big social media platform that really hadn't enabled music sharing in the way that we thought we could really do something unique with.
So talk to us about, look, Pandora has been going through a lot lately, a lot of executive turnover, this big investment from Sirius. How have things changed since then? Because investors were hoping for a buyout.
Yeah, well, I mean, all that happened before I joined. So last year did go through a lot of turnover, which led to me joining the company in September. And it's really settled down quite a lot since then. So we closed the SiriusXM investment right at the time I was joining. And since then, we've really refocused the company on a couple things. One is, we are, as you mentioned, the largest music streaming service in the U.S. 70% of our revenues come from advertising. Digital audio advertising is the one big digital advertising business that's not controlled by Google or Facebook. Pandora is actually the largest in that. So we've been investing in that. We bought a company called AdsWiz, which is the leader in audio programmatic, which really helps us, really invest in our strength of digital audio while we continue to grow our subscription business nicely.
Now, there's been this perennial question of whether Pandora is a standalone company or an acquisition target. I mean, is it a wait and see? Is that something you're open to, or do you see Pandora going it alone?
I can certainly see why other companies would find Pandora attractive, because there are few companies that have the scale of Pandora. But our strategy is to build on our core strengths. And we are, as I mentioned, the largest in digital audio advertising, and we're investing in that and continue to grow that revenue base and with the investments that we're making, while we also grow our subscription business.
And yet you have Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google, all chasing music with minimal profits. What is your strategy for profitability?
Yeah, again, it's, if you think about consumers, they're not homogenous. Not every consumer is going to pay a subscription. Most will consume music with an ad-supported, like they do on terrestrial radio today, which is a $16 billion marketplace, still waiting to be migrated away from traditional broadcast to IP streaming. And Pandora is really well positioned for that. So when we think about competition, of course we think about Spotify and Apple for our subscription business. But remember, 70% of our revenue is advertising. And that's more of a, our competition there is really more about terrestrial radio.
But what's the plan if artists start to really push buying their albums on paid streaming services?
That's great for our business. Our paid streaming services last quarter grew 63% year over year. So, it's a fast-growing part of our business. And, but again, we think consumers some will choose ad-supported, some will choose subscription. And we're really well positioned because we're strong in both of them.
Do you think content costs will continue to go up?
I think that there's a moderating effect that's happening now. And, we see it as the platforms start to gain more scale in streaming. And it's really to the benefit of the industry, because you're now seeing the music industry finally growing again after 15, 18 years of declines.
It's been a long time.
It's growing, and it's growing because of streaming. And so I think that there's a balance that's being found now between labels, publishers, and streaming services that understand that it needs to be a healthy ecosystem, because it is the future of the industry.
That said, listener hours were still down in the first quarter. When do you see that turning around?
I think that we have a big opportunity to grow engagement. So not just listeners, but also hours with our listeners. And that's a combination of what we do on the marketing front, what we do with our product and new features, like we've launched personalized playlists and premium access that lets any listener, whether you're ad supported or not, play any song. And those things start to move the needle for us on engagement.
So do you think you could turn them around by the end of the year?
I think that we're going to start to see improvements in that. And we'll continue, just like last quarter, we saw an improvement in, yes, it was still a decline from the prior year, but it was a big improvement over the prior quarter. And we expect to continue to be able to make improvements on engagement.
Spotify pitches data as its differentiation. What do you think Pandora's differentiation is? It used to be that sort of lean back listening ability, but now it almost seems that listeners want something different.
I think they want something additional. So certainly data is at the core of Pandora. I mean, Pandora invented how you use data to program music through the Music Genome Project. And it's why the engagement on Pandora is so much higher than any other music service. That hours listened per listener, it is way beyond any of our competitors. And that's all driven by data. But that data also drives our advertising business, which again, 70% of our revenues. And that's a big differentiation for us. So we actually have a business that can be quite a profitable business in our advertising, rather than some of our competitors who really use a free service only as a funnel into subscription.
Tencent has a relationship with Snap that goes way back. You now have a relationship with Snap. How do you think the Tencent music IPO will change the industry?
I think it will in a similar way to what we saw with Spotify, which is a lot more focus on really what's happening in the music industry and streaming and the opportunities and the growth opportunities. I mean, I think Tencent will put more of a focus on what the international growth opportunities are, but all of these companies coming to market, I think, really serve one broad thing, which is this is a growth industry, and there's lots of opportunity, and we're in the first inning of it.
And what's your continued roadmap for international growth?
Right.
Asia and beyond.
Well, the Pandora service today is only available in the U.S., but we just completed an acquisition of a company called AdsWiz, which is the largest digital audio programmatic advertising business in the world. They operate in 39 countries, and as I mentioned earlier, I think programmatic and digital audio advertising is a growth business that's going to exist for a long time, principally because of the shifts that we'll see from terrestrial radio to streaming, and much of which will be monetized for advertising. AdsWiz is at the core of that. We just completed that acquisition. That gives us growth opportunities globally based on digital audio advertising.
So how do we how should we expect to see revenue growth as a result of that AdsWiz acquisition?
Well, it's still a fairly early stage business, although it's growing rather rapidly. Their revenues relative to the size of Pandora are still quite small, so it'll take some time until it starts moving the needle on Pandora. But we know that we're in the right space for a long period of growth.
Home speakers are exploding. Amazon has seen subscriptions go up for its music business as a result of Amazon Echo. Do you see potential there for Pandora to see growth as a result of this home speaker explosion?
It's the fastest growing segment for us on Pandora, and listening on those smart speakers has more than doubled in the last year, and we see no end in that. But again, if you think about what the content that's consumed through speakers, a lot of it is music, some of it's non-music, some of it will be subscription, some will be advertising, but there's no display. So there's not a display ad or video ad that'll be served. It'll have to be an audio ad, which we're really well positioned for, both with AdsWiz and our core service.
Any speakers in particular favored by Pandora listeners?
Well, we see really high use on Echo and Alexa. So but they're the largest and they were the earliest. Sonos is also, I think over half of Sonos listeners listen to Pandora each month. So Pandora is very strong on Sonos.
What about HomePod?
HomePod, well, as you know,
not because of Apple.
Apple has given their music service preference on that, and there haven't been that many sold yet. So it's a little hard to, you can still use Pandora on it. It's a little clunkier than using the Apple experience, but it's a little too early to tell what will happen with that because the numbers are still small. What
does the future look like for you in this very crowded market between Spotify and Apple Music? Will there be more partnerships like we saw Spotify partner with Hulu?
Yeah.
What is the strategy?
Yeah, absolutely more. Oh, you also just saw us partner with AT&T. So we just announced in the last several weeks a partnership with them where you can get, if you're an unlimited AT&T wireless customer, you can get Pandora premium service for free with your subscription. So I'm a big believer in partnerships to drive your business. What I've found in other companies I've run is you get your best customers through partnerships. It's the lowest cost of acquiring them, and they tend to be the highest value customers. So you'll definitely see more partnership activity with us.
So if we do this again in a year, what kind of progress will you be talking about?
I think we'll be talking about the growth of digital audio advertising as a format. I think that's going to become a big theme, certainly within the next year. You'll continue to see our subscription business growing nicely, and you'll see a lot more partnership and a lot more expansion on the content side for us.
What kind of content?
Well, audio content principally, but beyond just music. So we're expanding more into podcasts. We want to do for podcasts what we did for music, which is really create discovery in a really highly personalized way, which doesn't exist for podcasts today. Most podcasts people find on a chart. There's nothing personalized about a chart. But think about what Pandora did for music discovery. We'll do that for podcasts. And then, because of our capabilities around monetization for digital audio, we have the ability to really change the podcast industry for monetization.
All right, it's a date. You're coming back in a year, if not sooner. Roger Lynch, CEO of Pandora, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Emily.
Exclusive interview. Okay, coming up, protecting an election. We look at the latest steps being taken to safeguard the 2018 midterms. Will they be enough? That's next. This is Bloomberg. With the 2018 U.S. midterms just months away, securing electronic voting machines is of paramount concern for U.S. officials. In South Carolina, a new lawsuit accuses election officials of leaving voting systems vulnerable to hackers. And today on Capitol Hill, the agency in charge of helping to protect those same systems was updating Congress on ensuring there is a paper trail for all votes as a backup against computer hacking. Same agency, the Election Assistance Commission, is in charge of distributing $380 million in new grants to states for election security. In fact, 48 states and 2 U.S. territories have already applied for $358 million of those funds to help create those paper trails. Our next guest is on the front lines of guarding computer systems from cyber attacks. Gil Shwed is the CEO of the Israel-based Checkpoint, a cybersecurity company valued at $17 billion. Which counts over 100,000 organizations among its customers. Gil, thank you so much for being here. So, how vulnerable are our elections to hack attacks this year?
I think pretty much all our infrastructure is vulnerable. It's sometimes surprising to see how easy it is to hack into all the new types of electronic machines that we have around our life, whether it's healthcare or elections or pretty much everything that's connected.
You say we're in the 5th generation of cyber attacks. What does that mean?
I think we've gone from 30 years ago when cyber attack just started with viruses to more and more sophisticated attack, growing with the 2nd generation of networks. And the 5th generation attacks, which we are now, are what we call multi-vector attack. They can come from us from the cloud, from the mobile, from IoT devices. They are what we call polymorphic, so it's hard to identify them. An attack takes a different shape every time, so it's much harder to detect them. And they can be really devastating. They can have a big effect.
So where are the biggest threats coming from? What nation states?
I think it's not necessarily nation states. I mean, the scary thing is that the technology that can be used by any amateur hacker or by any criminal group is the strategic technology that could have been developed by a nation-state organization. Like we've seen that the US tools, the NSA toolkit of breaking in was released to the internet 2 years ago. And equally, all the tools that are being developed eventually find themselves into the wrong hands. And that's the very, very scary part.
We had David Sanger, author of The Perfect Weapon, about cyber attacks, also a longtime New York Times correspondent, talk about the vulnerability of our elections. Take a listen to what he had to say.
What worries me about our next election, not just 2018, but 2020, is there will be other countries that will learn from what the Russians did and will devise new approaches. And the constant problem in cyber is you're always behind the 8 ball. The attackers are always thinking of new ways in, which is why you're seeing new defense technologies that look at sort of behavior instead of just past patterns. But we also need to begin to think about what the geopolitical solution is to this.
What is the tech solution? What is the geopolitical solution?
I think there's 2 areas to look at. One is the technical hacking to a voting machine and faking results. And second is influencing the public opinion, which we've seen in opening fake Facebook accounts, influencing the media with fake news and so on. And these are 2 almost different domains in what we need to protect. And there are actually tools for both. I mean, there are tools to secure the infrastructure and to secure the machines. There are companies that provide them. We can provide the great solutions for that. Tools to detect what Facebook accounts are fake, what things like that are being influenced. There are even technology tools that can identify that. I know a few startups that are specializing in that, and they can do a good job.
Speaking of your business, Checkpoint continues to trail Palo Alto Networks and Fortinet. What's the plan to continue to accelerate sales growth, and could M&A be in your future?
I think we are moving into a very different model from providing point solution like many of our competitors and handling the 2nd and 3rd generation attacks, moving all the way to tackle the bigger problem of Gen 5 attacks and providing an overall security architecture. That involves a change both in technology and in the business model, and I think we are pioneering that space. And we are actually seeing very, very good results in people's understanding of the problem, and even if the sales take off of some of it.
All right, Gil Shwed, CEO of Checkpoint. Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, we'll bring you highlights from the Allen & Company conference in Sun Valley. Here is former AOL CEO Steve Case giving his outlook on the current media M&A landscape.
Obviously, we announced the AOL-Time Warner merger almost 20 years ago, 19 years ago, and some of the things we were talking about then are now happening in terms of streaming and other kinds of things. So I'm not surprised that there's another round of kind of big mergers where companies are trying to position themselves for a future where consumers are going to have more choice and more control and more convenience, and it's going to move from the more traditional kind of distribution models, cable, and to a much more digital model. It was clear that it was going to happen. It's just taken longer than most of us would have thought before it did happen.
Some of the biggest players in tech and media are gathering in Sun Valley, Idaho for the Allen & Company conference. Bloomberg caught up with Sam Altman, who talked about how AI is changing the world as we know it.
I think the world is going to change in almost unrecognizable ways, and our political leaders don't quite yet understand this. And so I think if we don't, as a country, as a state, as anything, figure out how to get ahead of this massive change, which is going to be on a scale bigger than the Industrial Revolution, bigger than the Agricultural Revolution, we're going to be in a bad place.
Well, cloning isn't just science fiction anymore, and LYREBIRD has made sure of it. The Montreal-based AI startup has developed software that can digitally replicate almost anyone's voice. The online API will generate any sentence or word that you like based on just 1 minute of voice recording. Watch what happens when Bloomberg's Ashley Vance tries out LYREBIRD.
At the back of a suburban coffee shop in Montreal, you'll find 4 young computer scientists and their new startup, LYREBIRD. These guys are doing something amazing and frightening. They're using AI to clone your voice.
Are you speaking about this new algorithm to copy voices? This is huge. They can make us say anything now, really anything.
One of the guys behind this scary innovation is Mexican expat Jose. He taught me the art of the clone.
So you will need to record yourself for a few minutes of audio.
Thousands of letters danced across the amateur author's screen. When you start to eat like this, something is the matter. You guys better quit politics and take in washing. I don't know where that one came from. Okay, so create my digital voice now. Creating your digital voice takes at least 1 minute. 1 minute? My God.
Yeah, so to create some artificial voice of someone, you would need to record yourself for at least 8 hours.
Test your voice. All right, so now I get to type something.
Yeah, so the moment of the truth.
Okay. Once LYREBIRD's AI has worked its magic, after I'm done typing... Oh, I gotta spell better. Any words I put into the app can be played back in my digital voice. And here's the crazy thing. Even words I never actually said in the first place. Artificial intelligence technology seems to be advancing very quickly. Should we be afraid? I mean, I can definitely hear my voice in there. That's really interesting. I just picked those words at random, and I definitely did not say some of them, and it's like flawless in being able to sort of pick from just about any word and manufacture it. Hello World is the best show I have ever seen. This technology seems sweet, but lends itself to all manner of trickery. I've popped back to my hotel to test out the LYREBIRD technology a little bit, and you can see some really obvious ways that this could be abused. This is fake Donald Trump talking.
The United States is considering, in addition to other options, stopping all trade with any country doing business with North Korea.
And then you could picture somebody taking over your voice and creating some mayhem in your personal life. Now, to really put my computer voice to the test, I am going to call my dear, sweet mother and see if she recognizes me.
Hey, Mom.
Hi.
What are you guys up to today?
Well, it's Saturday. We didn't have any electricity early this morning, and we're just hanging around the house.
I'm just finishing up work and waiting for the boys to get home.
Okay.
I think I'm coming down with a virus.
Oh, why, you feel bad, hey?
I was messing around with you. You were talking to a computer.
I felt like I was talking to you. It's amazing.
Is that scary or good?
It could be scary if it was something really important. It's you now, isn't it, Ash?
I don't know.
It sounds like you.
Is it?
Yes, it sounds like it, yeah.
It is kind of cool to be a cynical bastard in my new artisanal computer voice.
Welcome, Russian friends, to our huge, wonderful, and very pure elections.
Bloomberg's Ashley Vance, or is it, in the latest edition of Hello World? That was awesome. All right, that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. From San Francisco, I'm Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg.